Now likewise fathom everything through a look into the future was also something that I foresaw. However, I hid this from our friend so that he would not be worried. So I also saw that you, Father, and you, Quetzal, would deeply fathom everything and thoroughly think everything through, in order then to enter into our plan. Patar says it was good, my child, that the both of you acted in such a way. I, as well as Quetzal, actually would have been against your conspiracy and would have wanted open words and statements if you had explained everything to us. Only through our look into the future and the recognition of the fact that from this alone, everything will turn out for the best have we concluded that your agreed-upon method is exclusively correct. So yesterday, I submitted the whole idea to the High Council, which was very much surprised at your actions but then concluded the same. Quetzal says, how did you say it once, my friend, what you call such an action as you and Semyaza have done? Billy says, dear friend, anyone who does something in the way that Semyaza and I have done with the conspiracy, such people are called by us sly dogs. However, sly dog only refers to when something is done that passes close to the law and honesty, without violating the law or honesty. This also applies to our plan with the conspiracy because we do not want to do wrong but aim at something good and valuable. Quetzal says, so as we, Patar and I, see it, both of you are sly dogs. Semyaza says it is an honor for me, together with our friend, to be called a sly dog. Thank you, Quetzal. Patar says, but now, quit your joking. Billy says the case is now well discussed, is not it? Quetzal says all necessities were, indeed, said. Billy says then I would like to ask one or two more questions if you still have the time. Patar says if it won't take too long, then ask your questions. Billy says it is about the fact which you, Patar, explained to me on the great journey, that a nuclear furnace bubbles inside of our Earth, so to speak. I also noted that for myself because it was not given in writing according to our contact. But now, I am not quite sure anymore about what you said in regards to whether or not our earthly nuclear reactor is responsible, among the rest, for the Earth's magnetic field. However, you explained that our Earth's nuclear furnace will still function for a few million years but is already in a stage of cooling down. Patar says the center, that is the most internal core of the Earth, consists of a nuclear fusion entity, as you express with your words. Nevertheless, this core is decreasing in its activity and, consequently, will expire in a few million years. And actually, this nuclear fusion core is involved authoritatively in the maintenance of the geomagnetism which will break down when the core stops its activity, that is expires, breaks down, and cools off. This means then that the cosmic radiation will strike uninhibitedly on the planet and radioactively contaminate it and, therefore, make it uninhabitable. Billy says this information is sufficient. Then still this Guido asked me whether I knew the reason for the disappearance of the Mayan culture. Do you know anything about that? Quetzal says one reason was very strong climatic changes, which extended approximately over 230 years. A time during which the Yucatan Peninsula, where the actual Mayan culture was settled, was hit by many droughts, which cost many people's lives or forced them into migration. Another reason was tribal wars and acts of war with foreign Indian tribes. Also, many people were carried off by epidemics, not only in the actual central area of the Maya but also in all the other areas where the Maya resided, such as in the areas of Belize, Honduras, and Guatemala, etc. The total population of all the Mayan tribes added together was about 17 million people. During those approximately 230 years of natural and environmental disasters, the epidemics and wars to which the Maya were exposed resulted in the fact that these indigenous peoples and families of languages disappeared in southern Mesoamerica, southern Mexico and northern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. Billy says, so it was. Unfortunately, I do not know much about the Maya, just a few things that belong to the general standard of education, like, for example, in regards to religion. There were numerous gods in all tribes, which were divided by the Maya into good and bad classes. The chief of all gods was Itzamna, the so-called god of heaven, or sky god. In the Yucatan, the rain god Chak played an extremely important role. The gods could change their shapes at will in each case and, thus, take on any form. In their ever-new combinations, the gods of the Maya were of great importance with respect to their prophetic calendar. There were prophesying priests who were in the habit of inquiring the influence of the gods on the fate of individuals with the help of oracles. These priests were also responsible for astrology and for the observation of the stars and, logically, also for the calculations of the calendars, because time and its activity played a very important and central role in the thinking and life of the Maya. Today's distant descendants of the Maya have been integrated for a long time into the developments of their respective countries. When the Mayan cultures disappeared and the Spaniards conquered Mexico, etc., they naturally aroused the indigenous stunk, which, along with the descendants of the natives, were Christianized by the Spaniards. Thus, there were also the so-called social rebellions, such as the Guerra de Casta, War of Chaste in 1847, as well as the Messianic salvation movements, such as the Sotil Uprising, from 1867 to 1870. This is part of the history of the distant descendants of the Maya and of their recent history, like the extremely bloody conflict between the indigenous small farmers and the military regime, when the civil war in Guatemala and the uprising of the Zapatistas in Chiapas, Mexico took place. By the way, this uprising was filmed under the title, Viva Zapata, Live Zapata, a film which I already viewed many years ago. Now, in the 19th century, insurgent Mayan descendants, Mesihuals, established in Quintana Roo and in the Yucatan the so-called free small states, in which the traditional forms of Indian life were maintained, which found its realization as the so-called concrete utopia. This arose in the middle of the 19th century, which could then assert and maintain itself against the Mexican army into the 20th century. However, 1915 brought an end to all of this, when Emiliano Zapata, as he was then called, on April 10, 1919, was murdered in Cuernavaca. From 1906 he played a very important role as a revolutionary leader and farmer with the base in the Mexican state of Morelos. He then, of course, helped during the Mexican Revolution that broke out in 1910. Emiliano Zapata was not very old because when he was murdered Cuernavaca the 4th of October 1919, he was only 36 years old. He was born in 1883, note according to SFART's information, not as adopted in 1979 in Anacuilco in the state of Morelos. Since his death, it permanently ferments with the Indians in the underground, so it can be expected that there will ultimately arise one more liberation movement from it. That is what I know, so not very much. Semyaza says you are too modest because you know more than I do in regards to these matters. Billy says it's certainly only half as bad. But if I may, can I ask another question, if you still have time to answer? Patar says there is, indeed, still enough time to answer a question. Billy says good. Thank you. It concerns the toxoplasmosis disease. This is an illness that is transferred from cats to humans, as well as from contaminated raw or not well-cooked meat of animals and birds, as well as fish that came into contact with the toxoplasmosis pathogens through contaminated cat excrement. Fish and birds, for example, because they received food that was contaminated in this regard, which is also the case with most diverse mammals. But a person can also, through direct contact with cats, be infected with the toxoplasmosis pathogens, for example, in that he can be licked by the animal or come in contact with the mouth or fur in which the toxoplasmosis parasite may have been caught, etc. The question, now, is this: how long can one expect that this evil will affect the people of Earth? Patar says we do not know that exactly. However, we are certain of the beginning, when the earth people added to themselves